So I made a video a few weeks ago discussing the Eileen Gray and Grace Community Church scandal. And needless to say, I ruffled some feathers and I rattled some cages. Now this video is the most viewed and commented video on my channel to date. And what's particularly disturbing is the amount of misogynistic comments that were actually left on this video, all from John MacArthur supporters. Now I understand that there are Christians who don't believe that women should lead or teach in church. Now, I personally don't believe that, and even made a video, one of my first videos, if not the first video on my channel, specifically about this topic. But these comments were different. There was a devalued and even hateful tone to them. So let's unpack this and let's go to scripture to see just how valuable women are in the eyes of God. And I actually want to use the story of Abraham for this illustration. Now, everybody knows the story of Abraham. He's the father of faith. Him and Sarah were advanced in age and they weren't able to have children. And then God blessed them and they were able to have a child by the name of Isaac. But there's so much more to the story that I want to unpack. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into the scriptures and read every single verse. However, I am going to summarize by chapter what happened to illustrate my point on the value of women in God's eyes. Now in Genesis 12, we're introduced to someone by the name of Abram. God had not yet changed his name to Abraham, and he's 75 years old. And God calls him out of his father's house and tells him that he's going to make him into a great nation and give him a land for his descendants. So Abram, his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all of their servants end up going to Egypt. And when they get to Egypt, Abram is actually so afraid because of how beautiful Sarai is that he ends up telling her, hey, listen, if anybody asks, tell them that you're my sister. Because you're so beautiful, they'll probably kill me just to get to you. This wasn't a lie because they were actually half brother and sister. However, it's obvious they're using this as a form of deceit. And lo and behold, Sarai's beauty actually captivates Pharaoh, and Pharaoh ends up taking her as his wife. Now this is where God intervenes and actually ends up sending plagues over to Pharaoh. Somehow Pharaoh ends up finding out through the plagues that Abram and Sarai are actually husband and wife, and he ends up giving them servants, giving them gold, and telling them, yo, get out of Egypt, get away from me, get as far away from me as you possibly can. Now in Genesis 15, God specifically promises Abram a son. And because of that promise, in Genesis 16, Sarai propositions Abram to sleep with her servant Hagar, whom, by the way, she ended up acquiring from that trip in Egypt. And she ends up reasoning that if she ends up catching the baby on her lap, in a way, it'll be as if the baby was hers, thus fulfilling the prophecy that God gave to Abram. However, that was not in God's plans, and in Genesis 18, Sarai, who's now named Sarah, is actually given a promise directly from God to have a son of her own. In other words, God rejects Ishmael, the baby that Abram actually had with Hagar. Now, when we get to Genesis chapter 20, we come across a person by the name of Abimelech. And guess what happens? Abimelech ends up seeing Sarah and is so captivated by her beauty that he ends up wanting to take her as his wife. Now, guess what happened right before they end up meeting Abimelech? Yes, Abraham and Sarah had a conversation beforehand, and Abraham tells her, if anybody asks, tell them that you're my sister. Now, this time when God intervenes, God appears to Abimelech in a dream and ends up telling him, if you touch that woman, I will kill you, because Abraham is my prophet. So now go to Abraham, who lied to you, and tell him to pray for you so that I don't kill you. And that's what Abimelech does. Finally, in Genesis chapter 21, at the age of 100, Abraham's promise comes true, and he has a son by the name of Isaac. Now, after going through that series of events, I want you guys to pay attention to something. Now, after going through this series of events, I want you guys to pay attention to something. There's a big difference in what Abraham and what Sarah were permitted to do. Let me explain. See, in Genesis 16, Abraham was permitted to sleep with Hagar and spread his seed. Now, it's not to say that that was God's will, that that's what God intended. However, God did permit it to happen. However, when we look at Genesis 12 and Genesis 20, Sarah was not permitted to even be touched either by Pharaoh or by Abimelech. On the outside, it may even look like there's a double standard. However, I look at it a lot differently. I believe that God valued Sarah so much and that she was so valuable that God did not allow her to be tarnished or tainted by either Pharaoh or Abimelech or anybody else. Her purity was so valuable and so important to God that had Pharaoh or Abimelech known her in that manner, then God would have had to start all over with somebody else. And that's how valuable women are in the eyes of God. Now, I understand that people have their doctrinal beliefs based on scripture as far as the role of the woman as opposed to the man. And I do believe that there is a role specific for the man and a role specific for the woman. However, those roles do not devalue one from the other. And the Apostle Paul even charges us as men to love their wives as Christ loves the church. So when we devalue women, we're also devaluing the church in the eyes of God. We end up making a statement. Now, as far as what that statement is, I'll let you guys figure it out. Well, thanks so much for sticking around to the end of this video. If you found any value at all, like, share, subscribe. Drop me down a comment. Let me know what you guys think about this video. And if you guys have any ideas about any other topics you want me to cover, please share them down below. Let's engage and let's talk. Until next time, peace.